attention, students and staff of Crossroads Charter Academy. This is Tom Paris, reporting to you live. Apparently we are on a 2-hour delay, which means we won't be in until 9 o'clock, which means I'd have to be out by 8:30. So I just don't even see why this would happen at all. All because of a radar confirmed tornado. That actually is stupid. So, a radar confirmed tornado? Just because the radar confirmed it doesn't mean that we have. Now I know you guys are I know you guys were anxious to be going back to school. But somehow we're not going to be going to school because of this radar confirmed tornado. So, that being said, ladies and gentlemen, while I'm alive, I actually have a real opportunity to read a good book to you. This is Star Trek Deep Space Nine, Book 3 in the Ultimate Star Trek Saga. And the name of this Book 3 of 4 Ultimate Star Trek Saga is called Time's Enemy. Now, Time's Enemy is completely different from all the other Deep Space Nine books. Emissary, Siege, Blood Letter, The Game, all those. But I actually had the opportunity to read this to you guys. Now, if I don't bore you to death, great. Because I encourage you to keep watching and listening. So, there I go. Star Trek Deep Space Nine, Time's Enemy, by L.A. Graff. Invasion Concept by John J. Ordover and Diane Carey. Invasion. Drop cloak. Captain Benjamin Sisko said as the 3 alien ships on the view screen swung in on the attack. The toneless curtness of Sisko's voice told Dax just how grim the situation must be. Divert all power to shields and weapons. Damage to forward shield generators, O'Brien's voice reported. Diverting all power from rear shields to compensate. Return fire. Sisko leapt from his command chair and went to join Dax at the helm. Starting evasive maneuvers, Program Delta. Alien phaser fire washed the Defiance bridge in a fierce white light. Before, out here where sunlight was a faraway glimmer in the blackness of space, ice lasted a long time. Dark masses of it littered a wide orbital ring that all remained of the spinning nebula that had birthed this planet-rich system. Cold, outer dark sheltered each fragment in safety, unless some chance grazing of neighbors ejected one of them into the unyielding pull of solar gravity. Then the mass of dirty ice would begin its long journey toward the distant sun, past the captured ninth planet, past the four gas giants, past the ring of rocky fragments that memorialized a planet never born. By that point, it would have begun to glow, brushed into brilliance by the gathering heat of the sun's nuclear furnace. When it passed the cold red desert planet and approached the cloud-feathered planet that harbored life, it would be brighter than any star. Its flare would pierce that planet's blue sky, stirring brief wonder from the primitive tribes who hunted and gathered and scratched at the earth with sticks to grow their food. In a few days, the comet's borrowed light would fade and the tumbling ice would start its long journey back to the utter dark. One fragment had escaped that fate, although it shouldn't have. It carried a burden of steel and empty space, buried just deep enough in its icy heart to send it spinning back into the cloud of fellow comets after its near collision with another. For centuries afterward, it danced an erratic path through the ice-littered darkness before it settled into a stable orbit in the shadow of the tiny ninth planet. More centuries passed while dim fires glowed on the night side of the blush globe that harbored life. The fires slowly brightened and spread, leaping across its vast oceans. They brightened faster after that, merging to form huge networks of light that outlined every coast and lake and river. Then the fires leaped into the ocean of space, out to the planet's single moon at first, and later to its cold red neighbor, then to the moons of the gas giants, and finally out beyond all of them to the stars. In all those long centuries, nothing disturbed the comet and its anomalous burden. No one saw the tiny, wavering light that lived inside, until a fierce blast of phaser fire ripped the icy shroud open and exposed what lay within. Chapter 1. It looks like they're preparing for an invasion, Jadzia Dax said. Cisco grunted, gazing out at the expanse of dark, crusted cometary ice that formed the natural hull of Starbase 1. Above the curving ice horizon, the blackness of Earth's Oort cloud glittered with bright stars, and the barely brighter glow of the distant sun instead. Instead, what it glittered with were the docking lights of a dozen short-range attack ships, older and more angular versions of the Defiant, as well as the looming bulk of two Galaxy-class starships, the Mukai Kubo and the Breedlove. One glance had told Cisco that such a gathering of force couldn't have been the random result of ship refittings scared the crap out of me. Because I had my alarm set for 6:30. Which is now gonna have to be an 8:30 due to the 2-hour delay. Anyway, back to the... Okay, now I have to restart. One glance had told Cisco that such a gathering of force couldn't have been the random result of ship refittings and shore leaves. Starfleet was preparing for a major encounter with someone. He just wished he knew who. I thought we came here to deal with a non-military emergency. In the sweep of transparent aluminum windows, Cisco could see Julian Bashir's dark reflection glance up from the chair he'd sprawled in after a glance at the view. Beyond the doctor, the huge conference room was as empty as it had been 10 minutes ago, when they'd first been escorted into it. Otherwise, wouldn't Admiral Heyman have asked us to come in the Defiant instead of a high-speed courier? Cisco snorted. Admirals never ask anything, Doctor. And they never tell you any more than you need to know to carry out their orders efficiently. Especially the Admiral. Especially this Admiral, Dax added, an unexpected note of humor creeping into her voice. Cisco raised an eyebrow at her, then heard a gravelly snort and the simultaneous hiss of the conference room door opening. He swung around to see a rangy, long-boned figure in ordinary Starfleet coveralls crossing the room toward them. Dax surprised her by promptly stepping forward, hands outstretched in welcome. How have you been, Judith? Promoted, the silver-haired woman's angular face lit with something approaching a sparkle. It almost makes up for getting this cold. She clasped Dax's hands warmly for a moment, then turned her attention to Cisco. So this is it, the Benjamin Cisco that Curzon told me about. So much about. It's a pleasure to finally meet you, Captain. Cisco slanted a wary glance at his science officer. Likewise. Likewise, I'm sure. Dax. The trill cleared her throat. Benjamin, allow me to introduce you to Rear Admiral Judith Heyman. She and Curzon, actually, got to know each other on Vulcan during the Klingon peace negotiations several years ago. Judith, this is Captain Benjamin Cisco of Deep Space Nine, and our station's Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Julian Bashir. Admiral? Bashir nodded crisply. Our orders said this was a primary one emergency, Cisco said. I assume that means whatever you brought us here to do is urgent. Heyman's strong face lost its smile. Possibly, she said. Although perhaps not urgent in the way we usually think of it. Cisco scowled. Forgive my bluntness, Admiral. But I've been dragged from my command station without explanation, ordered not to use my own ship under any circumstances, brought to the oldest and least useful starbase in the Federation. He made a gesture of reined-in impatience at the bleak cometary landscape outside the windows. And you're telling me you're not sure how urgent this problem is? No one is sure, Captain. That's part of the reason we brought you here. The Admiral's voice chilled into something between grimness and exasperation. What we are sure of is that we could be facing potential disaster She reached into the front pocket of her coveralls and tossed two ordinary-looking data chips on the conference table. The first thing I need you and your medical officer to do is review these records. Data records, Cisco repeated, trying for the non-committal tone he'd perfected over years of trying to deal with the equally high-handed and explicable behavior of Kai Wynn. Admiral, forgive us, but we assumed this actually was an emergency. Julian Bashir broke in with such polite bafflement that Cisco guessed he must be emulating Garrick's unctuous demeanor. So if we could have reviewed your data records 10 hours ago, all you had to do was send them to Deep Space Nine through subspace channels. Too dangerous, even using our most secure codes. The bleak certainty in Heyman's voice made Cisco blink in surprise. And if you were listening, young man, you would have noticed that I said this was the first thing I needed you to do. Now would you please sit down, Captain? Cisco took the place she indicated at one of the conference tables inset data station, then waited while she settled Bashir at the station on the opposite side. He noticed she made no attempt to seat Dax, although there were other empty stations available. This review procedure is not a standard one, Heyman said without further preliminaries. As a control on the validity of some data we've recently received, we're going to ask you to examine ship's logs and medical records without knowing their origin. We'd like your analysis of them. Computer, start data review programs Cisco 1 and Bashir 1. Cisco's monitor flashed to life, not with pictures, but with a thick ribbon of multi-layered symbols and abbreviated words, slowly scrolling from left to right. He stared at it for a long, blank moment before a whisper of memory turned it familiar instead of alien. One of the things at Starfleet Academy asked cadets to do was determine the last 3 days of a starship voyage where its main computer memory had failed. The solution was to reconstruct computer records from each of the ship's individual system buffers, records that looked exactly like these. These are multiple logs of buffer output from individual ship systems, written in standard Starfleet machine code, he said. Dax made an interested noise and came to stand behind him. It looks like someone downloaded the last commands given to life support shields, helm, and phaser bank control. There's another system here too, but I can't identify it. Photon torpedo control? Dax suggested, leaning over his shoulder to scrutinize it. I don't think so. It might be a sensor buffer. Cisco scanned the lines of code intently while they strolled by. He could recognize more of the symbols now, although most of the abbreviations on the fifth line still baffled him. There's no sign of navigation either. The command buffers in those systems may have been destroyed by whatever took out the ship's main computer. Cisco grunted as 4 of the 5 logs recorded with fluctuations and then degenerated into solid lines. And there goes everything else. Whatever hit this ship crippled it beyond repair. Dax nodded. It looks like some kind of EM pulse took out all of the ship's circuits. Everything lost power except for life support. That had to switch to auxiliary circuits. She glanced up at the Admiral. Is that all the records we have, Admiral? just those few minutes? It's all the records we trust, Heyman said enigmatically. There are some visual bridge logs that I'll show you in a minute, but those could have been tampered with. We're fairly sure that the buffer outputs weren't. She glanced up at Bashir, whose usual restless energy had focused down to a silent intensity of concentration on his own data screen. The medical logs we found were more extensive. You have time to review the buffer outputs again if you'd like. Please, Dax said. Cisco and Dax said in unison. Computer, repeat data program Cisco 1. Machine code crawled across the screen again. This time, Cisco stopped trying to identify the individual symbols in it. He vaguely remembered one of his academy professors saying that reconstructing a starship's movement from the individual buffer outputs of its systems was a lot like reading a symphony score. The trick was not to analyze each line individually, but to get a sense of how all of them were functioning in tandem. This ship was in a battle, he said at last, but I think it was trying to escape, not fight. The phaser banks all show discharge immediately after power fluctuations are recorded for the shields. Defensive action, Dax agreed, and pointed at the screen. And look at how much power they had to divert from life support to keep the shields going. Whatever was after them was big. They're trying some evasive actions now. Cisco broke off, seeing something he'd missed the first time in that mysterious fifth line of code. Something that froze his stomach. It was the same Romulan symbol that appeared on his command board every time the cloaking device was engaged on the Defiant. This was a cloaked Starfleet vessel. He swung around it to fix the Admiral with a fierce look. My understanding was that only the Defiant had been sanctioned to carry a Romulan cloaking device. Heyman met his stare without a ripple showing in her calm competence. I can assure you that Starfleet isn't running any unauthorized cloaking devices. Watch the log again. Captain Cisco. He swung back to his monitor. Computer, rerun data program Cisco 1 at 1/4 speed, he said. The 5 concurrent logs crawled across the screen in slow motion, and this time Cisco focused on the coordinated interactions between the helm and the phaser banks. If he had any hope of identifying the class and generation of this starship, it would be from the tactical maneuvers it could perform. Time the helm changes versus the phaser birds, Dax suggested from behind him in an unusually quiet voice. Cisco wondered if she was beginning to harbor the same ominous suspicion he was. I know. For the past 100 years, the speed of helm shift versus the speed of phaser refocus had been the basic determining factor of battle tactics. Cisco's gaze flickered from top line to third, counting off milliseconds by the ticks along the edge of the data record. The phaser refocus rates he found were startlingly fast, but far more chilling was the tactical run. Was the almost instantaneous response of this starship's helm in its tactical runs. There was only one ship he knew of that had, dangerous, that had the kind of overpowered warp engine needed to bring it so dangerously close to the edge of survivable maneuvers. And there was only one commander who had used his spare time to perfect the art of skimming along the edge of that envelope, the way the logs told him this ship's commander had done. This time, when Cisco swung around to confront Judith Heyman, his concern had condensed into cold, sure knowledge. Where did you find these records, Admiral? She shook her head. Your analysis first, Captain. I need your unbiased opinion before I answer any questions or show you the visual logs. Otherwise, we'll never know for sure if this data can be trusted. Cisco blew out of breath, trying to find words for conclusions he wasn't even sure he believed. This ship, it wasn't just cloaked like the Defiant. It was actually the Defiant. He heard Dax's indrawn breath. And when it was destroyed in battle, the man commanding it was me. Captain Cisco would let me. It occurred to Kira that if she had a strip of latinum for every time that someone had said that to her in the last 48 hours, she could probably buy this station and every slavering Ferengi troll on board. Not that the prospect of owning a dozen wrinkled, bat-eared larcenists filled her with any particular glee. But at least Ferengi were predictable, and they didn't act all affronted every time you refused to jump at their comm calls or told them their problems were trivial. After all, they were Ferengi. Oh my gosh. If I'm boring you guys to death now, I'm sorry. Any aspect of their lives not directly related to money was trivial, and they did everything in their power to keep things away. And keep things that way. Humans, on the other hand, thought the galaxy revolved around their wants and worries, and tended to get their fragile little egos bruised when you implied that they might be wrong. With that in mind, Kira had spent the better part of her first day in command. A good 2 or 3 hours at least. Placiding, compromising, making every sympathetic noise Dax had ever taught her. In the theory that a little stroking, no matter how insincere, was all the crew needed to carry them through the captain's absence. Somewhere around lunchtime, though, she elbowed that officer's desk for the 4th damned time, and the 5th trivial work schedule dispute let himself into the office while she was under the desk padding about for it, and the 6th subspace call from Bajor or Starfleet or some other damned place started chirping for immediate attention, and it became suddenly vitally important that she conduct the EV inspection of weapons sale to herself. She fled ops with the ball still lost, and the wilds of Cisco's office furniture hopeful that shuffling with the whining crewmen off to personnel and playing 10 minutes of yes man with a Bajoran minister would buy her enough time to get safely suited up and out into vacuum. O'Brien, bless his soul, only stammered a little with surprise when she plucked the repair order from his hands
on her way to the turbo lift. Next time, she'd just have to leave the station without the environmental suit. It would make everything so much easier. Well, Quark hadn't quite progressed to petulance yet, but there was something about having a Ferengi voice whining right in your ear that made even an over-large radiation hard suit seem small and strangling.
Oh my gosh. Right now, I'm feeling tired. And I'm gonna have to stop. And I will stop there. Now, let me ask you this. Say that another 2-hour delay happened. What would you have done? Would you have just gone back to sleep? Would you have just stayed up watching a movie? Playing games? Playing music? Or even just by, or even just simply doing something like this. So I hope you guys know that this is only a 2-hour delay. Now, I'm not entirely certain that everything should be in order. So, if you guys were any similar to me, just simple question. What would you do? What I would tell what I tell you right now is that I actually would do something a lot similar to what I would do. So, if you guys are curious about what all might happen, I'm not entirely sure what might happen. So, I would just kick back, relax, and enjoy what time you have. And I'm starting to fall asleep. I'll be back in a minute, guys.
Attention, folks. Better get ready. Because we're going. I'm heading now.